Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guests, Diane Dewey and Julie Berry. So our first guest today, Diane Dewey, is here to share with us her new book, Fixing the Fates, an adoptee story of truth and lies. Now, Diane holds a BA from Villanova University, the honors program in liberal arts. She later completed a certificate program at the Arts Institute of Philadelphia, working for the Guggenheim Museum and the National Academy before founding her own arts appraisal firm. Diane earned her master's degree of science in mental health counseling from Capella University in 2015. So let's welcome to the show, Diane Dewey.
Thank you so much, Marianne. It's a pleasure to be here.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. You know, I've got to ask, it must have been such a journey to write this.
Well, it definitely was. And I wrote it basically in real time when all of these events were occurring. I had been thinking quite a lot about my identity, and really identity is at the heart of the book. Not just who am I, but that's a big one, but how do I identify myself and sort of the narrative that we tell ourselves. So I did, it really evolved quite a bit while writing the book. And I think the process of writing the book and getting ideas down was enormously helpful in the sense of externalizing what was internal to me and being able to look at it a bit objectively, and seeing how my feelings were actually evolving from the point in 2002 when my biological father contacted me out of the blue when I was 47 years old.
Well, there's so much that goes into being an adoptee, and sometimes the secrets that families hold. What do you feel was kind of a really tough part for you during this journey?
I think the difficult part was in recognizing that, my illusions about people had to be dismantled. And most of that came about because my biological father, Otto, propped himself up in a way to make himself look better. That in my story, he played a role. Obviously, he was very young. I was willing to be extremely forgiving of him. But I think he was of a generation and maybe of the culture. He's Swiss, and he was 74 when he met me, where everything was bound up in pride and keeping a certain image of himself alive. He felt himself to be very much my rescuer in a way from oblivion. So I think the hard part was, as much as I had resonance with him and as much as I felt a connection with him, I had to dismantle the notion, first, that he was perfect, second, that any of us are perfect, including myself, and to really get down to a more human level. I realized I had projected a lot on him, and I learned subsequently through my biological mother and her family what the true truth was. So that disillusionment was kind of heartbreaking. It was also unexpected because you would think that somehow someone who arrives at your doorstep 4 decades and a half later would want to come clean in a way, would want to spill the guts and kind of have a cathartic moment. He said that he was doing this because he wanted to resolve issues in his life, but in fact, he never did really go there. So I think that disappointment, I remember a year in this 16-year trajectory where I was really disheartened. And I think I was probably pretty angry, which is not at all healthy state to be in. So you have to do a kind of workaround to find in yourself permission to sidestep that and to say, look, I'm going to be a survivalist here. I'm going to do what's positive for me. And that is to let this go, basically, and to kind of strive on.
I think that's so important for people who discover that they've been adopted. Of course, there would be that level of anger, maybe fear, and different things that are going on, and have you question, like, who am I? Who am I really?
Right. Well, honestly, Marianne, I had known all along that I was adopted, right? So, but that, as you say, doesn't answer the big question of who am I? And, coming at it as an adult, I was almost, 50 when I was working through this. And I do think that the question of who am I is perhaps a little more ripened. You do have you have a self concept, right, of who you are as a person. You differentiate yourself from your parents. My adoptive family was very loving and wonderful, but I definitely had differentiated myself from them. I had moved off from where I grew up in Philadelphia and was in New York in the art world. So I had a kind of sense of myself, but true that, your heritage and your ancestry is a huge component. I think what I was to ultimately realize, though, is that this concept of identity is a co-created process that's going on as we speak, and that you do refine every day your integrity, your values, what you believe in, what you stand for, all of it, without getting too unhumorous about it. I mean,
Yeah.
you do build this character, you build this person every day.
Well, it's interesting how our parents really are um, very, and you mentioned co-creative, but it's such a great word for it, or so co-creative in how we view ourselves.
Yes, and I think that goes in many ways, right? I think that the concept of introjects, what we get from our parents that's undistilled, that we haven't really looked at or processed. As we mature, we're in a stage of actually looking and saying, well, wait a minute, those messages that I received are not entirely accurate, right? They're not really representative of who I am. So I think that in the end, even when you get all of this information, my genetic coding was unspooling all along. Of course, I made my own sewed and made my own clothes when I was very young. And I later learned, these 5 decades later, that my mother was a seamstress. My biological mother was a seamstress. And I, was out hiking on the Appalachian Trail, in Pennsylvania where I grew up. And my parents were like, well, why would you need to do that? And, so I was genetically likened to who I was, but, characteristics were emerging. But I do think that the real work is inner work, and the real work is making yourself whole to the best of your ability.
Yeah, it really is a journey. And especially when one's dealing with a lot of questions in regards to their biological parents, I can assume that this is can get a little confusing at times.
It is confusing, but I think what you need to go with is your intuition. And I think that those strong messages and really that kind of inner pull, those are very accurate barometers of what you're drawn to, and what you're drawn to, not in a compulsive or impulsive way, but what you're irrevocably drawn to. And I had that kind of resonance with my biological mother's family. As I say, I had tremendous connectivity with my biological father and his family as well, but there was another layer of deception there. And I think that Nadine Gordimer said, the soul craves the truth. If you let yourself, okay, if you really give yourself permission, you're drawn to a truth for yourself. And that's true of everyone. That's not a special ability. I think the special ability is in giving yourself permission to say, these other ideas are falling away. I'm going towards what I'm drawn to. And then you reach a kind of a place of arrival that's very much like a homecoming.
Do you feel that that's some of the kind of universal themes that your book has?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the idea of pinning down information, right, getting the story straight and all this data, yes, that's there. It's absolutely valuable. However, it's not the place of arrival. The place of arrival is where you find out what in it is true for you. What is the thing that is really um, making you whole? Being, from in my case, it was being confirming that being open and honest was my essential ingredient in life. And as you know, people we meet daily have perhaps very little regard for that, right? They're creating fantasies for themselves, and you're just sitting there nodding at what they're creating, but it's not your reality. The other thing I might mention is that I'm very aware that my story was a privileged one in the sense that many adoptees don't have the option of finding their biological ancestry, more and more so because of the DNA searches that are available to us now, but less and less in terms of geopolitical boundaries because Chinese adoptees or even Indian or Pakistani or even from grown children from the former Soviet Union, it's not an option. So, internally, there's that point of saying, I have to start here. This is my point of delineation where I create my identity. And I have so much respect for that. I think that, we tend to say reunification is, it's so important, it's a must, it's all of these things, but that's very pejorative. And not everybody has that. Not everybody has that option. And that doesn't make their search any less authentic.
And it's interesting, sometimes, it's a lot to weigh because it may not be, a really happy ending.
Well, to be honest, it depends on what you think a happy ending is. Mm-hmm. That sense of stillness, that sense of having a place to be is such a contentedness that even though some people read my story and say, I used humor in writing it, but it's sad. I was never able to meet my biological mother. My biological father, Otto, was a philanderer basically, and is a kind of perpetrator of these the illustrious knight in shining armor kind of thing. But that I finally arrived at a place that I could feel peace in. That is happy.
I love that. And it's such a story for everybody, regardless where they are, what their family looks like.
I think that's true because I think that identification and how you identify is thematic of the search or the mini search that everybody is on. And I think that belonging, the sense of belonging, who do you belong with? Who is your tribe? Those questions, that's a really essential part of, I think, what we're doing here, even though none of us really know what we're doing here on Earth. But in terms of paving the way or lighting the way for yourself to reach a sense of, closure or identity with yourself and a sense of truly knowing, it means really sorting through so many different stories and so many different aspects of your family. I think of it in terms of people who are identifying in terms of gender or, lots of different cultural elements. And blended families, of course, bring to the table a whole nother, layer of that. I think the other thing, the gatekeepers are now being replaced by the internet because there's so much, there's so much validity in the DNA searches. So again, this question of identity, it can't be linked to just facts alone. It's the search. And it's the search that everybody's on.
I think you have to show up with a lot of empathy and compassion during that process because there's just so much that can show up.
Well, absolutely. I think, Marianne, that's the key to it. And it's very, it's work, right? To completely remain flexible, to be willing to take the candle all the way around the statue and look at what it is from the other person's point of view, and to understand where each of the parties are coming from, whether it's a biological parent or your adoptive parents, or even yourself. You know, what were your real motivations for getting involved? What were your expectations? What did you bring to the table in terms of all of this? And to extend to yourself and to others a sense of mercy and a sense of understanding and of a sense of just understanding that we are human and this is our humanity.
With everything that you've been through, how has this defined your concept of family?
Well, clearly it's much less restrictive, right, than it used to be, because I had this nice little, I had this little nestled family growing up in Havertown, Pennsylvania, where I was an only child. And, we had cousins and aunts and uncles nearby. So it was a fun family. It was my family. It was all I knew. I do think that biological family, it is resonant and it certainly belongs in the concept of family. I think what happens, though, is that people tend to kind of go overboard. I see a lot of slogan making going on out there in signs and, signage where, family is who you love. Well, yeah, except the commitment level, right? Like family is a lifelong blood oath. It's an oath that we take to ride it out to the very end. And that is what your adoptive family does. And they sign on for that. So I think, my family is now, it's my biological father's family. It's my biological mother's family. It's my adoptive family. And it's my husband's, it's my in-laws. Those of us who have kind of looked each other in the eye and realized we're in it for the long haul.
Mm-hmm. It's part of this greater journey. And, I know you mentioned Otto initially, and what was it like when you first met him?
Oh, well, it was dazzling. It was this very electric moment because, of course, I'd never seen anyone who was a biological relative before. So there was this whole, frisson of revelation that, not least because, as luck would have it, out of all of his family, I am the one who is the spitting image of him. So when I look at him, he is me, except shorter and with white hair and male. So, it was fascinating to have that mirroring. And in neuroscience, mirroring is a very potent exchange of kind of cellular information. And I had that with him. We compared our traits, we inventoried all of our characteristics, we checked off what were our likes and sort of ignored the dislikes because of that impact of being like, wow, this is amazing. So it would come later that we would allow ourselves to realize we were very different people. But that initial encounter was, it was incredibly potent.
Hmm. Was there anything during the writing process of this book, because it sounds like you worked through so much as you were doing it because it's happening in real time, was there something that really took you some time to work through?
Well, yeah. I mean, I had it's a lot like being pregnant, right? You're going through something that everyone is weighing in on. Your therapist is telling you one thing. And I also went back to school for my master's in science of mental health counseling. And when I look back on that now, I mean, I graduated when I was 60. So when I look back on it now, it's clear that I was investigating. I was looking for, help to help me work through this. I would say one of the most difficult things was people saying to me, but you've got to find out exactly what happened, like in a chronological, brick by brick, lay it out linear fashion. And I'm here to tell you, you don't have to. Because first of all, people are not going to come clean. The previous generation was not into openness. If anything, the barricades to secrecy was the mantra. So I think there has to be a kind of respect and regard for that. That's where they're coming from. Anything else is going to cause them to shatter. So, I think the hardest thing for me to deal with was actually other people saying to me, this is what you've got to do. This is how you have to handle this. And I really had to go inward and say, what is it about for me? What is this journey about? And ignore the rest of the noise. That was the hardest thing.
What would be some of the questions you would advise other adoptees to ask themselves during this process?
Well, I think it really does connect to the previous question. And you have to ask yourself, what am I looking for? If I do meet this person, what am I expecting of them? And what's my agenda for this reunion? And I think that, that process of answering those questions, that could be like a 5-year process right there. But we don't have time. Yeah. So, you have to kind of reduce it. And you have to, I do think you have to do that soul talk and find out why you're in it. And it's not going to be completely clear. It never is. But just to give yourself a little bit of guideline, do I want this person to be perfect? Do I want this person to reflect me? Do I want this person to tell me something I didn't know? Am I just looking for medical background information? Just lay it out. It can be as superficial as, I just want to see somebody that looks like me, and I don't want to necessarily have regular communication, or my communication will be like every 6 months. I think it's really good to build some barriers and boundaries, is the more common terminology, beforehand going in. What do you really want? Do you want a Christmas card? Do you want to be blended into the life of this person? And if so, what does that look like for you? And those are really technical questions that everybody should go down that path, I think, involved in this process, and create a vision for yourself. Literally, am I in the person's living room? Am I with their children? Am I just communicating by phone? And really make it clear so that you have like what the ideal situation is for you.
Yeah, because that can be a journey that can go a lot of different ways. And so having some kind of preparation on level of expectations and maybe none, it really is helpful for people.
Absolutely. And you mentioned none, which is just a great unifier, right? It's like all or none. Both of those words are more pluralistic and all-encompassing. Clearly, my world is much more pluralistic than it used to be. And I really embraced the idea, and I did actually going in think that I had no expectations, but I did. And I found out about myself through that.
What advice would you give to people who are going through this experience? You're connecting with biological parents, and you also have like resentment and anger.
Well, I think you're going to learn that has to fly out the window pretty early on, because there's no real place for it, in the sense that we have all made mistakes, and finding that compassion for the actions of others, even though it impacted you, you've got to crack yourself open, and you've got to open yourself up to the compassion and empathy for your biological family. They've done the best that they could do. And I don't even think, to be honest, that some of these experiences will even happen until you do open yourself up. I went on a retreat with the author Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves, years and years before I was reunited. And reunited with my biological mother's family specifically. And I remember her like interrupting one of the sessions and Dr. Estes saying, look, there's this convent over here and the nuns can pray the paint off the walls. So I'm going to pass around a little box and take a scrap of paper and everybody write down their intercession so that the nuns can pray for us. And I thought to myself, well, this is my opportunity. I'm going to write down to my biological mother, who I had never encountered. I'm going to say to her, look, you are next to me in my heart. You are together with me always, and I don't judge you. And I just wish you peace in your life and in your heart. And I feel that we are united forever. And I sent that. And it wasn't that long afterwards, maybe a couple years, that all of this started unfurling. Mm-hmm. But I think the anger thing, they're really, you can go in your room and have a primal scream. You can talk it out with your friends. You can go do your kickboxing. You can do whatever you need to do, but don't bring it into the table because everybody is flawed. And if you do bring it into the table, you can be honest about it and find out all the reasons that it's not appropriate.
Well, I think, because everyone has their different perspective, and as there's a reunification process happening with biological parents, sometimes, stories can change, or maybe we're not being told that the exact truth. So as things are being uncovered, it's got to be a frustrating process to get to some point where you either understand the truth or you're okay not knowing what that could be.
And I think that everybody has a different threshold for what's okay. My book is just my one person story. I don't even know if I can give advice, but I do know that we are here in America in 2019. We are basically indoctrinated by post-Freudian psychology. We think the best thing is to have catharsis, and even the act of writing a memoir is just enormously confessional, right? I'm sharing all of my ideas, my emotions, my reflections on truth, but not everybody is coming from that perspective, and other cultures value secrecy above all else. So it's a real anthropological, cultural investigation as well. And I think it's necessary to put each person that you're encountering in their context.
Yeah, put that, kind of have it that way. And, and I think just, in dealing with families, regardless of what they look like, your book really helps people get to a place where they can have more empathy and understanding for just what different people bring to the table in the family dynamics.
Well, I hope so. I can honestly say that I've met people, some of whom haven't gone through what I've gone through, or what other adoptees go through. But, other people arrive at it a lot more easily and have kind of ready-made empathy. And I think for adoptees, I have nothing but respect and really honor for why we might not have instant empathy, right? Because we've been through a lot. We've been severed from biological family. We've been impacted psychologically. There's a lot of grief and loss and mourning that we're not allowed to acknowledge because we have to be sunny and we have to be assimilating into our adoptive family. So I have nothing but high regard for the struggle that adoptees go through as all this emotional life goes underground, right? But I also know that the more you can bring these unretrieved parts of yourself out into the light, the better off you'll feel. Looking at anger, looking at your sense of being betrayed, the ugliness, the sense of being forever charred, it's all difficult to overcome, but it's really worth shining a light on it. So, as I say, I know people, dear friends of mine, who are just really good at it. I wasn't really good at it until I had to go through this journey. So maybe that's part of why I did go through the journey. And I'm still continuing.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a lifelong process, doing that. And with, the experience and wisdom and knowledge you have on this topic, what advice would you give to people who are not just picking up your book and reading it for the first time, but people who are looking at their family dynamics?
Well, I think family dynamics are something that we all sort through. And even if there is, there's a coding, right? There's a way in which people interact where different personalities have the power and have the influence. And, you have to go in and kind of dismantle the notions of why this should exist. Like it doesn't, and see for yourself, is it credible? Do you subscribe to it? Because again, we're co-creating. So when you're looking at your family dynamics, I think it's a good idea to just go in and be full of questions and be full of curiosity and ask yourself whether this has to exist in your mind's eye. It doesn't mean that it will change anything. It won't, but it will change your interpretation of it. And that's all we have, obviously, control over. Yeah. So I think it's a very worthwhile exploration for everyone.
Well, Diane, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
I have a website, dianedewey.com. I have an email there, diane@dianedewey.com. I certainly welcome all communication. I also am on Instagram, Diane Dewey 1, and Facebook, Diane Dewey 3. I'm on Twitter as well. It seems like that's DK Dewey @DK Dewey. Yeah. I'm clearly not as involved with Twitter, but I just really do welcome communication. I love the idea of other people's stories, and I'm fascinated and interested and invitational about other people's stories.
Well, Diane, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you, Marianne. I think your work is so valuable, and I congratulate you on it.
Well, thank you so much, Diane. It's been such an honor to share this time with you and to talk about your new book, Fixing the Fates. Again, if you'd like to connect with Diane Dewey, you can at her website, dianedewey.com, for more information. We are going to pause here for a quick break. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
If not me, then who? This ethos is driving the Travis Manion Foundation to empower veterans and families of fallen heroes to develop character in future generations. In 2007, Marine First Lieutenant Travis Manion was killed in Iraq while saving his wounded teammates. Travis's legacy lives on in the 5 words he spoke before leaving for his final deployment. If not me, then who? Guided by this mantra, veterans continue their service, developing strong relationships in the community, and thrive in their post-military lives. Visit TravisManion.org and ensure the character of our nation's heroes lives on in the next generation. If not me, then who?
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with our second guest, Julie Berry, who's sharing with us her new historical fiction, Lovely War. Now, Julie is the author of several books, including All the Truth That's in Me, The Emperor's Ostrich, The Scandalous Sisterhood of Prickwillow Place, Secondhand Charm, and many others. Her books have been nominated, including a New York Times notable title. So let's welcome to the show, Julie Berry.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, what an honor it is to have you here, and congratulations. I mean, my goodness, your book is getting such great reviews. You have to be so happy as an author.
It's pretty exciting, I have to admit.
Yeah, I mean, they're saying most of the reviews I'm seeing say, because this is a young adult book, it's saying, steal this book from your kids.
I hope so. I always think when I'm writing a book that I'm writing for all ages, or all ages that are capable of that reading level, let's say. So I think that a great story is a great story, and some of those age demarcations start to sort of fall away.
Well, was it your intention to write a young adult book?
It was. I've worked with a young adult publisher for a while now. I always, I got my start writing for children and teens, and they're the first audience that I think about, but it's always a delight to me to hear that adults are enjoying my work too.
Well, why don't you share with us the inspiration behind this book? I mean, this is quite a tale. It's not, when people think of books that have to do with World War I, this is totally different.
One of the things that really struck me as I set out exploring this topic was how few books there are, at least for young people, about World War I. There's plenty of nonfiction for adults about it, and probably fiction for adults as well. But for young people, World War II gets the lion's share of the 20th century war historical fiction. So that's one thing that sparked my curiosity. Why are we not talking about this more? So I'll give just a little overview of the story and then explain kind of how those ideas came to be. Lovely War is 2 love stories rolled into one. It's the story of a young couple, Hazel and James, who meet in London at a parish dance on the eve of the final year of the war, and they fall quickly in love. And James goes off to the trenches, and Hazel soon follows him to France as a volunteer with the YMCA as an entertainment secretary, basically, so playing piano for the troops. And while she's there, she meets 2 other young people who become our second couple. She meets Colette, a Belgian refugee who's lost her entire family to the German invasion of Belgium in the first weeks of the war, and also Aubrey Edwards, who is an American soldier and member of the famous Harlem Hellfighter Regiment, as well as being a ragtime pianist and musician in their famous ragtime band. So those two, Colette and Aubrey, become our second couple. So these two love stories are made possible by the war. It's the war that brought these couples together, but of course it's also the war that could tear them apart. And what makes the novel perhaps somewhat unique in how it tells these stories is that they're actually told to the reader by a group of Greek gods who are hanging out in a Lux Manhattan hotel room in the middle of World War II, so in 1942. And so they are our storytellers, chiefly Aphrodite, the goddess of love, but with some help from Ares, god of war, and Apollo, god of music, and Hades, lord of the underworld. So we have love telling us a love story interspersed with war telling us a war story, and music and death chiming in here and there.
It's quite intriguing how you're able to bring all this together, and it's done so well.
Oh, thank you. I knew that the premise demanded a high level of execution, or else I never should have tried it. I knew that, these Greek gods had better come out right, or I never should have even made the attempt.
Well, and that's the part that I think a lot of people are very intrigued by. It's like, okay, so what inspired you to add the Greek god portion?
Well, it started right from the very beginning, and I knew that I wanted to tell a very romantic love story set during World War I, and I'd been researching the war, and I'd been, taking a stab at developing characters. I was interested in ideas, but I hadn't yet figured out who my humans were going to be. And I realized as I tried many beginnings, which I ultimately abandoned, that the problem was one of point of view. A love story demands a very close and intimate point of view, a very close proximity to the young lovers. We want our point of view to really occupy even their bodies, their quickened breath and their beating heart and all those little sensations that go along with love. But I felt that to write just a close and intimate point of view story about young lovers during the war would miss so much of what the war really was on the global stage, and how it affected entire societies, entire countries, how it toppled governments and redrew the map of the world, how it changed society for so many groups, not just soldiers, but women and the families back home, and minority groups and colonial peoples. And so I struggled to reconcile this need for both a close-up point of view and a much broader bird's eye panoramic global point of view. In particular, I really was interested in a point of view that could encompass large swaths of time. And so I began to think, what if love personified could tell my story? And that was intriguing, but love personified would hardly be the voice you would take down into the trenches. And so then I thought, well, maybe I also need war personified to tell parts of this story. And so then I thought, wait a minute. We already have love personified. We already have war personified, and they're already secret lovers. So that was just too good to pass up. And from that point on, the story really ran. So there was no Hazel until there was Aphrodite. And in my writing, this idea of using the gods was no afterthought. It was there from the very beginning.
What a beautiful way to interweave all that together and bring that into the story that it is. And I love how, Aphrodite, she's got some explaining to do.
Yes, that's right. Well, so the premise is, the setup is that Aphrodite and Ares arrive at this hotel for what looks like a tryst, a rendezvous, and they're followed up to their hotel room by a bellhop who's sort of persistent and won't leave them alone. And as soon as they think they're alone in the room, they begin to kiss. A golden net falls down and encompasses them. They're captured, they're caught, and the lights flip on, and there's the bellhop, who turns out to be Hephaestus, who is Aphrodite's jealous husband, and coincidentally, Ares' own brother. They're both Hera's sons. So the jealous husband has finally caught up with the cheating pair and captured them in his golden net. Now, this comes right out of the Odyssey. That part, the golden net, I did not make up. I just decided to put it in 1942 Manhattan because the clothing and music are so much better in 1942. So that was an easy choice. So what follows then is instead of Hephaestus taking the pair to Mount Olympus to humiliate them in front of the other gods, I decided that Aphrodite would persuade her husband to allow them to settle this matter privately. So he basically puts his wife on trial right there in the hotel room with him acting as judge and jury, and charges her with infidelity. And as the conversation ensues, it really turns into more of a conversation about what love and war have to do with one another, and why love is still relevant in a modern industrialized warfare world, and how love can even hope to survive with such global catastrophes. So to plead her defense and to make her case for why she still matters, she tells these two love stories, which she calls some of her finest work.
Well, this is definitely finest work that we're talking about here.
Thank you.
Yes, and we'll let our listeners and readers pick up Lovely War to find out more about how that transpires. You also address some really interesting, some tough issues when we talk about racism and women's roles in society in your book as well.
It was fascinating to me as I delved into my research to learn how far-reaching World War I's effects on society were. I hadn't really made the connection, or perhaps I hadn't made it since high school history class, that it was World War I and the contributions of women during the war that really gave women the right to vote in the United States and in the UK. That all of the arguments for why they were too fragile and too emotional and too unintelligent or even too physically weak to engage in public life really were shown for the nonsense they were after all of that women did to, build bombs and build airplanes and grow food and run society while the men were off in France. So the impact on women and how it broadened women's horizons and got them out of the house and traveling the world was really fascinating to me. Also, my research kept bringing me to stories about the Harlem Hellfighters and the other all-Black divisions that served, which forced, an exploration of what segregation in America looked like in 1918, and particularly what it looked like in the military, and how it was that these soldiers who enlisted to serve their country, and in fact, to even try to demonstrate to a deeply white supremacist America that they, as Black Americans, were every bit as American, every bit as manly, every bit as courageous and intelligent and disciplined as anyone else might be. They enlisted very deliberately to demonstrate their merits, and instead what they received was unspeakable violence, lynching, mob hostility from within the U.S. Army and from the communities surrounding the training camps, many of which were in the Deep South. So this was an age of terrible race riots in Houston, and nearly averted riots in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and other parts of the country. And all of it was based on this fury and outrage at the thought of Black soldiers in uniform. The uniform of a U.S. soldier commands a certain dignity and respect, and the contributions of a veteran demand respect and admiration. And this was just intolerable to a large element of American society. One of the things that really broke my heart was learning about how Black soldiers returning from the war, Black veterans, were the group most likely to be targeted by lynching and racial violence, because white supremacist America just couldn't handle it. And what a heartbreak, to have to fight your country for the privilege of fighting for your country, and then to, be met with violent reprisals when you return home. It's so shameful, but it's a story that had to be told. And I felt, as I researched it, that I would be committing a grave error if I only told, your sort of conventional World War story, whether it's one or two, that just kind of portrays white heroism and not shine a light on this very ugly, violent underbelly to it.
Well, I'm so glad you included that, because it's a piece of history that needs to be discussed. and I think people need to be aware of it. And you've done it in such a way that it's interwoven in Lovely War, where people are looking at these different social issues that are coming up, going, you know what, I can't believe that happened not that long ago. Especially when we're also talking with women's roles in society. I mean, that some of that stuff was pretty intense.
That's true. And, I think what I came away feeling was that we need to be talking about these issues because they're still with us today. Admittedly, we've come a long way. We've made progress in a lot of these areas, but not enough. And the kinds of geopolitical conflicts that brought about World War I, and the kinds of internal, domestic political issues in the various countries involved. I mean, it was chillingly familiar, and it really showed me that we cannot take any form of progress or any kind of peace for granted. We cannot assume that we've left the uglier parts of history behind us, and that a global war could never happen again, or that we could never again fall into the kinds of colonialist or racist or sexist errors that were with us in the past. I truly believe that World War I is as relevant now as it was then.
And in some ways, maybe even more so, because we look at just, how women are being treated. And in your book, Lovely War, it talks about that and has people really thinking about, like, what are some of the differences, and are there really that many differences? Because
for sure.
In some cases it's like, well, it still happens,
Definitely. But it's inspiring to see too what these women did in the face of those injustices and inequalities. It's inspiring to see how they, rolled up their sleeves and dove in regardless of the dangers and of the attitudes that were heaped against them. And likewise with all of the soldiers, the conditions in the Western Front and the conditions in trench warfare were just unspeakable. And how any of them woke up in the morning and did their duty with German bombs raining down upon them, I just can't imagine. I salute them entirely for their incredible courage in dealing with what the world had handed them, what time in history had handed them. Their parents' generation had lived in comfortable Edwardian, prosperity and peace, tea parties on the lawn and croquet and lemonade, and then the next generation inherited this. It's bitter, but they did what had to be done.
When you were doing your research for this book, how long did that take?
Well, the research and the writing, they sort of go together for me. And I this book was a little bit behind schedule for me. I really wanted to get it out as close as possible to the centennial of the end of the war, which was, 2018, November 11th. And so I wish I'd had the idea about a year sooner. That would have really helped. But I was a little late to the party. So I did the research and the writing in a really compressed schedule. I think it took me about 14 months of research and writing, but there wasn't a lot of sleep happening in that time, I will say. It was really intense, and I was writing feverishly and researching feverishly, and my husband and I did take a trip to France and to Belgium to visit war sites and memorials and museums, which was an amazing experience. We, visited the restaurants that were mentioned in the book. We visited all the places where James and Hazel went, and where, Aubrey and Colette went. So that was a treat, but it was certainly no leisurely vacation. We were on a tight schedule, and we were going to see all the sites as quickly as possible. So it was a relatively short period of time considering how much time I would have liked to devote to it. But I think I crammed quite a lot in, and I wrote in tandem with the research so that the writing could guide what I studied, and so that the research could also guide what I wrote.
Well, we've talked about how the African American soldiers were treated when they returned and during the time that they were enlisted. What are some of the other shocking things that you discovered in doing your research?
Well, let's see. one thing that was interesting, if perhaps also I bet ironic, was that the African American soldiers, particularly the Harlem Hellfighter Regiment, they were effectively handed over to France. The U.S. Army really didn't know what to do with them, and they feared that no white division would want to fight alongside a black division, and that few white commanders would want to preside over a black division, and so they were given to the French army. Now, the French and British armies had begged the United States to give them divisions and outfits of soldiers to add to their ranks, and General Pershing, I think commendably, did not want to relinquish command of any American troops because he did not want French or British generals using American troops as cannon fodder. It kind of makes sense, right? They're not your own, so you might view them as a bit more expendable. So he did not want to relinquish that control of any American troops, but he didn't mind relinquishing control of an all-black division. They could go wherever. And so that's kind of shameful. But the upside of it was that they fought with the French, and the French had no axe to grind against them. They did not have that same prejudice. And so the French Army Command and the infantry welcomed the Harlem Hellfighters with open arms, with truly, brotherly camaraderie. And deep friendships formed. And when the war was over, many members of that division and other black divisions stayed in France because they found France to be so much more congenial, a culture and atmosphere so much less prejudiced. So that was both inspiring and encouraging, although my further research indicated that the same could not be said for how they treated their own colonial black subjects. So Senegalese and other French colonies, those colonial citizens might not have enjoyed the same treatment as American black men. So it's interesting how economics and colonialism shape racism in different ways throughout the world at that time. So that was, really eye-opening and fascinating to me. Let's see. Other shocking things. Oh gosh, there's so much. I probably should have kept a shocking items file.
I'm sure.
That the conditions of prisoners of war, the medical conditions on the front, such tragedies caused by just the simple lack of sanitation and antibiotics. So many of those deaths could have been prevented. Kind of on the gruesome, macabre front, the injuries, the disfiguring injuries that the war caused did ultimately lead to tremendous breakthroughs in prosthetics, prosthetic limbs. Facial masks were developed to hide some of the gruesome facial injuries caused by shrapnel and explosives. And the sight of soldiers in their gas masks was so chilling and so gruesome that these images of these prosthetic faces and these gas masked faces are part of what spawned what we think of today as this modern science fiction movement. The genre really, in some sense, I mean, not that there'd never been speculative fiction before, but modern science fiction as we know it and modern horror as we know it got their starts in World War I because of these gruesome injuries and the prosthetics that were created, as well as the masks that were used to ward off chemical gas attacks. So, those connections just fascinated me. Likewise, the tie-ins between World War I combat and Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Tolkien fought in the war and went and wrote his fantasy epic as a sort of mythologized view of his experiences in the war. So I'm a big Tolkien fan, so that was really fascinating to me as well. I'm rambling. I just love this topic. I could go on and on.
Well, you're not rambling. I'm so glad that you're sharing this with us because, it isn't until people really do this research and find this information out that we can bring it to light and have these discussions. And so I'm so appreciative that you took the time and you're so passionate about this because I think that there's some honor that we need to really give to, different soldiers that were involved in World War I and that really didn't get any recognition.
Absolutely, and the same is true for World War II, for Vietnam. Obviously the Army has made progress, but the courage and heroism of people of any group that has been marginalized within the United States, who nevertheless donned the uniform and stood in harm's way on behalf of the United States, the gratitude we owe, the respect we owe, and certainly the support that we owe in all ways, whether that's veterans benefits, educational benefits, employment for returning veterans, support for their families. It's deep in my heart in a way that I had not felt prior to doing this research. The gratitude I feel for those who serve, and the admiration I feel for their incredible courage, as well as the concern for the harm that war does to people, the psychological damage of living in a combat zone. We've made progress since World War I in understanding and treating those needs, but we have such a long way to go.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, there's so much that needs to still be discussed there. What is the overall message that you want readers to take away from your book? I know there's so many, but if you had to choose one, what would that be?
It's funny. As I was working on the book with my editor and going through many drafts and many revisions, she kept saying to me, so at the end of the day, what is this book about? I would say, it's about everything. I don't know. It's about war. It's about life. It's about love. I don't know. It's about everything. It took me several revisions to kind of arrive at that place. And what I realized is that the book really is about love, and about whether love can survive a broken world, and whether love can survive broken lives. Nobody who lived through World War I and survived it came home unscathed. Whether physically or emotionally or spiritually, they were all different. And the loves that they had left behind when they went off to war faced a crisis when they returned. Could those relationships, those loves, survive? And the reality is not all of them could. But what I hope to show is that in general, I believe that love can survive the wounds of war. Love can survive wounds to the body and wounds to the soul and the spirit. That love is the healing power that makes humanity possible, even though we keep having wars like this. And so Aphrodite, as goddess of love, she really is showing how she heals the world in spite of these cataclysms that keep on happening, both on the global stage and in individual lives.
Well, I'm so glad that you wrote this book, Lovely War, and I feel like it's perfect time for this book to be out. Julie, where can people connect with you and be part of your community?
Well, I'm easy to find. My web address is julieberrybooks.com, and that's also my handle on most social media platforms, Julie Berry Books on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. I post a schedule of upcoming events. I travel all over the country, for festivals and signings. So I'm all over the place, and I do love to hear from and meet fans. So just search for Julie Berry author. There is a Julie Berry actress who is much more attractive than I am. So you just want to make sure that you look for Julie Berry author.
Well, I've seen your photos. You're fabulous too, so it doesn't even matter. Your book, Lovely War, is amazing. Julie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, thank you, Marianne. It's been a delight.
Thank you, Julie. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new novel, Lovely War. Lovely War is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Again, if you'd like to connect with Julie, you can at julieberrybooks.com for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.